What do you say to those people that say, you know what, it may sound bad, but just for the sake of our own protection, this isn't a Muslim ban because not all Muslims are bad, but this is an immigration ban because we don't know who these people are?
Well, to that person, I would say that is pretty much painting them all with a very dark brush. That is painting them all in this very negative light. That is not representative of who these people truly are. Like I said, out of the hundreds of thousands of refugees alone, let alone the millions of immigrants that we've let into this country, such a small, insignificant number of them, only 3, have ever been arrested for even remotely being involved in a terrorist plot or any form of violence at all. And so I think that in and of itself is a very negative kind of idea to have of people from those areas. And it's with all of the issues going on in our country regarding police violence and brutality, I don't want to get into that right now. A lot of people say don't judge all the police by just a couple bad ones. Don't judge just one bad apple necessarily. But I think that people are selective with that opinion, and they don't always look at every situation like that. So I think it's important to look at the actual numbers and the actual statistics of how much damage has been done to the U.S. from people from these countries, and it's been relatively none. There have been 0 fatalities to U.S. citizens from any of these 7 countries. And what's really interesting is that out of these 7 countries, none of them are none of these countries are the countries that were home to the people that enacted 9/11, such as Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates, things like that. And so it seems like he's not even really targeting the countries that he would say he should be.
Right. And I think that's a big misconception out in the media, and it has been for years. I remember being little and my dad telling me from a very early age, if you ask someone why we went to Iraq, a lot of people back then, I was in 5th grade and I used to ask people, why are we in Iraq? And they go, well, 9/11. That had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11 had to do with Al-Qaeda terrorists from Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned. But a lot of people are coming out and saying, well, Trump is not going to ban UAB in Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they have oil. And oil, as many people know, is the biggest conglomerate in the world, ExxonMobil, and look who he hires as his Secretary of Treasury.
And Trump's done extensive work with Saudi Arabia.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
And so I think this clearly is probably an economic issue, and it was easy for him to say, well, yeah, we can ban Sudan because, well, they don't have oil, they don't really give us anything. We don't need. They're not going to scratch our back. We don't need to scratch theirs. Now, would you say that the main reason for so many of these people out there having this fear, can you put the blame on just him, or is this also the fault of the media and not just Fox News, not just CNN? I mean, is this MSNBC's fault? Is this Facebook's fault? Is this Twitter's fault? Is this Instagram's fault? Is our generation being so politically active on social media, is that causing this rise in fear? Because every 5 seconds when I look at my Facebook feed, it's either someone posting something about how someone should be more liberal and forgiving, or how someone should be more conservative and safe for their family. I saw a post earlier today and it said, every night I lock my doors. It doesn't mean that I don't like anyone out there. It just means I don't want them to come into my house if I don't know them. And that sounds fine on paper, but when you think about the backbone of America and what it's built on, if you look at the Statue of Liberty, it says, bring your weary, your poor, and a lot of people are joking and saying, well, that offer may vary now. And, I mean, as a person you're only 2 years younger than me, and we've been around the block with social media and everything. We've seen it growing up, and we are part of that millennial group, and especially being on a campus like this, it's very politically active. Do you think that the blame needs to kind of be put on the media as well and not just Trump?
I don't think that Trump is necessarily the person to blame 100%. I think that the way I've been kind of looking at it, and the way I kind of dealt with him getting elected post-election day, I kind of realized that there is, I think, a growing sickness in our country. And so whenever your body's sick, what does it do? It produces physical symptoms to let you know that you need to change what you're doing in order to get better. So I don't think that Trump is the cause of a problem. I think that Trump is the physical embodiment of problems that have been present within the U.S. for decades now. So I think that while he's now in a position of power to do negative things, I don't think that he is the cause of a lot of these negative feelings. And so I think that social media, large, big-scale media itself are part to blame. And also, just simply because there's not necessarily a voice in the media community that has a totally unbiased viewpoint. It's always hard to have one of those. And so I think that there is a lot of fear being presented because that's what gets clicks, that's what gets views, not necessarily totally unbiased opinions.
Right. So, I mean, I think the media is really at its own fault because whatever brings in ratings is what they're going to put on the screen. And I think a large part of why, like you said, Trump was even elected is because I think this has been growing for quite some time now. And I think people were sick of constantly electing people that they trusted. And then they looked at them and said, okay, well, maybe you didn't do everything you promised. Maybe you weren't the guy I wanted to answer all my questions. Maybe you weren't the answer yourself. And I think a lot of middle America finally said, you know what? I'm not voting for Trump because I necessarily want to. I simply can because I didn't want Hillary or I didn't want this person. And it was easy for them to just go in there and say, yeah, flip the switch, turn the system on its head, and let's run with it. And I don't think a lot of people thought he was actually going to do these things. And what's funny is we complain about presidents who don't go through with their promises. And now we are sitting here 2 weeks in and going, okay, wow, maybe what he said was true. And to be honest with you, I didn't think he was going to do half the things he said. I really didn't. I thought, okay, he's just saying this to hype people up, to really reach those conservative crowds and make them feel safe. But at the end of the day, some advisor is going to say, okay, Donald, you know what you said was great on paper for this group of people on the conservative side. But in the reality of things, this isn't really going to work. And somehow he has been able to make these moves. And it's really shocking. And on paper, it's not a Muslim ban, but this is clearly a directed, I don't want to say attack, but this is clearly a chess move to say, okay, we're in control here. We're not letting you in. And it seems crazy to me that we would close borders out of fear. I mean, are we being fueled by fear tactics here? I mean, many people wanted to compare him to Hitler, and I don't want to do that. I don't think it's that severe, but these are things that powerful dictators have done for years. They make the people that they control afraid of someone else, and it all rallies everyone together. And we saw it with the Cold War and Reagan and the Russians, and we look back at that and go, what were we thinking? Why couldn't we come to an agreement? And now we're doing the same thing. And I think when you look at history, the whole point I like history is you're supposed to be able to look back on it and learn from your mistakes. Are we as a society taking steps back? Or are we just at a point now where we are so worried and scared that we just want to put a stop to things? I mean, what is happening?
Something I've really been thinking about a lot is a Mark Twain quote that goes along the lines of, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think that that's what we're experiencing right now. You look at the way progress has happened in our country and throughout the whole world, there are usually several years of progress and then some slight kind of backwards steps taken. And I think that right now we're kind of in the backward direction. And I'm not totally sure what, the cause of all these problems are, but I do think that we do need to learn from history, and we do need to look at a lot of what Trump ran on and what he is using to implement the things he wants is fear. And that's never been what America has been about. America has always tried to be the pinnacle of freedom and leadership throughout the whole world. And I think that right now we're being, laughed at and mocked by a lot of the world around us just because of who he elected and the things that he is doing. And I just, it's a troubling time, I think.